xxmariaathenaxx, and today we're going to be talking about the lingua latinae, or the Latin language, and why I'm learning it, what resources I'm using, and what my current study methods are, because I only just started learning, and I hope that I can give some new learners of Latin some ideas about how they can get started, and also because I want to be able to compare my studies in the beginning to my studies later down the road. So, before we get to today's video topic, I want to talk a little bit about our sponsor, italki. italki is an awesome resource for foreign language learners, especially if you, like me, want to learn when it's convenient, which could be at 3 in the morning. On italki, you can write journals in your target languages and have them corrected by other learners. You can get into contact with so many people from all around the globe. You can read articles in and about your target languages, chat with people, and find out how the languages you're learning are actually spoken. And apart from that, you can sign up for tutoring in more than 70 languages, which you guys know I already started doing tutoring for Dutch and for Irish, and I promise, they tailor these lessons to your own language learning needs, and it is an awesome resource if you're looking for really affordable tutoring sessions online. If you click on the link down in the description box, it'll take you to my promotional page where you can sign up for one tutoring lesson and get another tutoring lesson free of charge. So I really hope you guys take advantage of that deal if you're looking, like I said, for affordable tutoring lessons online, and I really wish you all the best with your language learning on italki. So, my reasons for learning Latin, I could probably sum that down to the really short point of I think the Romans are cool, and have always thought that they were cool. I remember in high school, some of my friends were taking Latin in class, and while some people would have then tried to argue that English actually came from Latin, which it doesn't, but a lot of people still think it does, even though a lot of people would maybe try and argue that, you can still see how a lot of English words that we do have actually come from Latin roots, and some of my friends who were studying Latin in high school just would go on about all the cool stuff they were learning in Latin, and I was like, oh, I really want to take that. And I tried to sign up, didn't have enough time in my schedule when I was a senior, so it sadly never happened. But then when I was in college, I got to sign up for some classics courses, which only made me want to learn Latin even more, because these were more historically based classics courses. So we learned all about the multiculturalism that was present in the Roman Empire. We heard all about Rome's presence throughout the Mediterranean and all of the Greek gods and Roman gods, because they kind of mixed together, which is a whole subject unto itself. But I have always been, like I said, really fascinated in the ancient Romans, and just as I've gotten more into the classics, it's becoming a necessity to learn Latin. And apart from that, because Latin is a dead language, I've always had this fascination with it, in that if I could learn to speak Latin, which there are debates about whether or not you can speak Latin as the Romans would have spoken Latin at different time periods, but that aside, actually being able to speak and say things in a conversation in Latin, I think that would be utterly amazing. You know, I'm really in it for being able to read texts that were written from different Latin-speaking authors and Latin writing authors, but if I would be able to actually use it and make orations in Latin, that would be the ultimate language learning goal of mine, I would probably say. It's very, very strange, very outdated, but I would totally want to do that. But so, to start out with learning Latin, I am focusing a lot on the grammar, at least basic grammar, and also a lot on vocabulary. So I want to talk about vocabulary first, because grammar gets into this whole big web of how do you learn super intense grammar, because Latin is usually described as being this really grammar intense language, especially since you're learning it mainly to translate and to write when you're in different courses, or so I've heard from people that learned it themselves. But so the first thing that I'm doing is I am using apps to acquire more Latin vocabulary. So luckily, I just got a smartphone. I have Memrise on here to start out with. I'm doing a little bit of research over the next couple days to find out what other apps I can use to learn Latin, but just give me a second. So here I have my Memrise account. I'm learning Latin actually through German on here, because I think it's really important to support your language learning in not just your native language, but also in other languages that you're proficient in. So eventually I would hope to move into Latin and French, and Latin and potentially Dutch, other languages, we'll see. But so what this basically does is it gives me a handful of new vocabulary words that then I have to, I'll be given a word up at the top and I'll have to match that to one of the choices that they have. There's a super fast round that there is where I'm constantly racing to try and put in the correct answer before the time runs out. And this is just Latein, Grundlagen, Grundvokabeln. Like I said, I think it's super important to support your new language learning skills that you're acquiring with your language skills in other languages, so that it's not just all English to Latin translations going on in my mind, but also Latin to German and Latin to, like I said, French and other languages. But so to start out, I'm playing that game about 10-15 minutes a day when I have time, 5 minutes here and there, and it adds up throughout the day. In comparison to other languages that I learned, I'm also making note cards for this because there are so many endings that can be tricky in Latin. So even though I'm familiar with the case system, I have been, for instance, here's the word terra, writing out that word using all of the different declensions that it would take because it is an A declension. First lesson, Latin noun. But I don't think I'm going to really continue making my own note cards, except for in some circumstances, because for right now at least, I found this awesome vocabulary note cards list, which they had this at Barnes & Noble's, and it's from SparkNotes, and basically I'm just going through and I'm looking at about 20 cards per day. There's 1,000 in the pack, and using that to memorize some more Latin vocabulary. In the other books that I have, which I'll show you once we get to grammar, in the grammar book that I have, they give you different vocabulary lists that you should learn. Apart from that, I picked up a Latin-English dictionary because there are online dictionaries for a lot of different languages, but I personally like to have one book in front of me so that when I'm sitting there learning, studying for my books, I don't have to haul out my laptop, haul out something else, get distracted on social networking or whatever. So that's why I got a regular Latin dictionary. And apart from that, I also have a super specific dictionary, which I have this for German as well, and I would recommend this to anyone, if they have it in your target language, to anyone who is going to be writing or translating stuff predominantly. This is the Latin Verbs Dictionary from Barron's. It basically gives you all of the conjugated forms of the verbs, and for some of them it makes different notes about related words, which for me is super helpful. So what I recently did, because like I said, I only just started, and so I only know one type of verb conjugation. So I went through, it's the verbs that end in ARE, and I looked up at the top, selected about 20 words, and wrote them into my notebook, and wrote them with the definitions so that now I can look at those, I can practice writing out all of the conjugations, and I purposefully picked out words that I know will relate to the stuff that I'm learning about in Latin. So here is my Latin book, which when I picked this out, I saw the horse, I thought Troy, I thought ancient Greek, ancient Roman, and then I was like, okay, that's gonna be my Latin workbook. But so some of the words that I picked out were just common words like to change, to wash, to walk, to sail, which to sail, that sounds like a word that you wouldn't really need to use that much, but from the other classic studies that I've done, I know there's a handful of words that will crop up all the time. So like sailing, fighting, different words for swords, different words for killing someone. Those will come up a lot. So some of them I've written down, different ways of giving orders and forbidding people from doing things that all end with the ARE in their regular forms. But so here's my list. There's a sticker on there because I messed it up when I was writing it out. But basically I'm taking the vocabulary that I'm learning in that big Latin verbs book and just writing it in list format in my actual notebook so that it's not going to be that difficult for me to memorize new words as they come along and see, okay, what's the ending for that? Because I have them all in the same spot from the very beginning of my learning. So apart from that, I do have, like I said, a handful of note cards. What I'm now most likely going to restrict my note card use to is different conjugations for verbs and certain rules that are really important. So I have first declension verbs, first declension endings, and the meanings of each of the endings in the case system, which the case system, I'm not too afraid of it in Latin because I am very familiar with the cases in German, but it's also just having to memorize the big chart of what all of the endings are. Not looking forward to that. Apart from that, I have one book for grammar right now, and it's actually not the Wheelock's Latin book, which is the one everyone recommends. I do have that on my study list, so I plan on getting that maybe when I'm halfway through this book, but this book is Latin made simple, and I'm just going one chapter at a time. Usually I break it up into 2 lessons, and because I picked Tuesday for some odd reason as being my day for studying Latin intensively, that's the day where I will do a big workbook section out of this. There's different exercises, translations, readings, and a whole bunch of grammar that's described. And then if I have any questions about the grammar, I just will go somewhere online. That hasn't happened yet, but if I don't understand how the grammar is described in here, then I will look online. I'll ask some of my friends who are learning Latin what their resources are. And basically, this is good so far. It is pretty concise, except they already expect that you have a knowledge of all of the grammatical terms. You can use it as a beginner, but you need to have already learned all of the grammatical terms to be able to follow it without having a headache, I think. Apart from that, though, I've had this for the longest time. This is one of the Pons summaries of einen Grammatik, and I have not gotten to use this really at all, except for the one section that's on here, which, like I said, it's the endings for the declensions for nouns. But as I move through my learning, this has all of the main grammatical terms that you'll need to know and main grammatical points. So I'm going to compare, like I said, they already have the first section that I did, so if I need to look that up just on the go, I can have this with me, because I'm a nerd, and chances are I probably do have something like this on me, like all the time. It's weird. But these I definitely recommend, not just for Latin, but for any language you're learning. I know I have this, I have the German one for English, for my tutoring that I do, and then also for Russian. And then I have just, they have the English version of these that I've seen are like the Spark charts that you can get, so I have those ones for German. It's just a good thing to be able to, you know, briefly look up the grammar that you need to find on the go. So I would recommend getting one of those. And apart from that, like I said, I did the classics courses from before, so I'm not just trying to learn the language, but I'm also learning with the intention of reading more classical texts that were written in Latin. So for now, I'm just refamiliarizing myself with ancient Rome, and I started off by reading Tacitus, Agricola. I'll show you right now, I have my bookshelf with some other classical works in translation to read. So I think all this supplementary reading is super important because it gets you into the time period and into the minds of the people speaking Latin, so that even if you're reading something in translation, you can think of generally how they would express what it is you want to express in Latin based on how you know it's being expressed in the translation, which there's kind of little ticks that you can notice about different languages when you're reading them in translation, which I'll re-look those up. Like if I see something when I'm reading, for instance, I'm reading Anna Karenina, and I'll notice some general things about Russian style and translation that I also noticed when I was reading Chekhov. This sounds so boring, I'm sorry. But I'll notice similar things, and then because those stand out to me, I will have more questions about how Russian works and more questions about how other languages work when I notice that kind of little thing in the translation that stands out to me. But yeah, apart from that, I mean, those are all the resources that I have for Latin because of how ancient Rome was very much affected by the ancient Greeks and the ancient Egyptians and the Etruscans. I'm also reading through Edith Hamilton's mythology book because this summarizes basically how the Greek gods were initially reported about and written about by ancient Greek authors, and then it goes through some of the Latin authors actually also wrote about the Greek gods, and obviously if you know about ancient Rome, they stole a lot of things from a lot of people, so Jupiter, Zeus, similarities out the wazoo. Yeah, so I'm going through reading that because, like I said, Greek culture really influenced Roman culture, and I know that a lot of these figures will play a part in some of the Latin readings that I'm doing later on the line. So it's both language and literary studies with a little bit of history in there, just to really get into the time period, really become competent about ancient Rome, about the Latin language, and about how people speaking Latin at various points in history would have thought, and I find all of that really fascinating. It's a mix, like I said, of language and history, and I just, you know, also morph it into my autodidactic studies so that I'm not just able to write things in Latin, I'm also able to explain how that affects ancient Rome and all that cool stuff. But so that is how I am starting to learn Latin. I hope you guys got some inspiration from this, and if you have any recommendations for online sources where there's either films that were produced in Latin or about the Roman Empire, I would really be interested in those, and also worksheets from beginner to intermediate. I mean, right now I'll just use the beginner worksheets, obviously, but just having them for down the road would be super awesome. So if you guys know of any of those, I would love to hear about them. And I wish you guys all the best with your language learning. I hope that you're keeping busy before everyone who's going back to school goes back to school, or everyone who's on vacation goes back to work. So yeah, just keep learning, and I will see you guys soon, which it's pretty much right now, it's been my anniversary of being on YouTube. So there's going to be a special video that will come out sometime soon about that. But for now, I can't wait to see you guys next time, and thanks for watching. Bye!